Hi, here is a video looking at non-commodity costs, in particular some recent increases and the cause of those increases. We will start by looking at what non-commodity costs are increasing and why, in particular government decisions that have affected it, how it's going to affect your own energy bill and concerns we have, and finally, and perhaps most importantly, things you can practically do to manage these increases. My name is Stephen Evans and I lead the team that forecasts industry costs for npower Business Solutions as well as E.ON Next's 6 million customers. Let's start then with Clean Power 2030. This is the catalyst for the latest increases that we're seeing. Clean Power by 2030 is super important in order to receive safe energy and sustainable energy and secure energy. We only have to look back to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That pushed gas prices up because it made gas more scarce, but on the back of that, electricity prices shot through the roof and were really expensive, simply because gas-fired power stations were setting the price of electricity. And clean power not only makes the world a cleaner place, but it also protects British electricity from being subject to the same geopolitical risks. Let's look a bit more closely then at Clean Power 2030. It's the government's commitment to generate 95% of electricity from clean sources, that is, sources of generation that don't emit carbon dioxide, like wind and solar and nuclear, by 2030. So it's very ambitious. And at a surface level, it is a big renewables push. And of course it is. These graphs on the right show how offshore wind needs to triple and onshore wind needs to double by 2030, while solar needs to grow by a similar magnitude. But it's more than just a renewable building program. We also need to build a lot of electricity networks. The reason for that is because of the location of renewable generation versus the old historical coal and oil and gas fired generation location. These older ones were built near to major towns and cities, and typically an electron of electricity would only have to travel 20 or 30 or 40 miles to get from the generator to the business or the home. Whereas these days, because renewables is being built in more remote areas such as Cornwall or the west of Wales or Scotland, or quite a lot these days off the east coast of Britain, electrons are having to travel 200, 300, 400, 500 miles to get to the consumers of it. What that means is that you need an electricity motorway built to get the electrons from those remote locations down to the centres of population, and the cost of that is on the same comparable basis to the cost of the actual renewables, and in the past we haven't needed that, so a big electricity motorway needs to be built. Also a focus on nuclear delivery. You will know about the nuclear RAB, regulated asset base. That is a programme to subsidise Sizewell C and other future nuclear power stations, including small modular reactors. Clean Power is also looking more holistically at things like energy storage, long duration flexibility, changing planning and consenting laws, so only those which are requesting planning that are likely to get built pronto get the approvals, rather than having a huge backlog that slows the whole process down. The final area I want to draw attention to is supply chains and workforce, because it's no good saying you want to build all of these wind farms or these transmission networks if we can't get the building materials and the companies with expertise in building these to the UK. We need to remember that Britain isn't the only country rolling out large amounts of renewables and new transmission systems, so we have to compete on a global stage for the expertise and the ability and the materials to do that. So a big focus on supply chains and workforce has been part of Clean Power as well. This graph, I'm afraid, gives the reality of the scale of cost increases that we expect to see. So historically, we've seen, in fact, year on year, ever since 2001, industry costs have been rising year on year. That's the purple bar. Industry wholesale electricity costs have been a lot more volatile. They've shown a general upward trend, and particularly since 2022 and the Ukraine crisis. So industry costs are going up. I was actually speaking with E.ON UK's overall CFO Chris Norbury a few weeks ago as he was preparing to talk to the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee, giving evidence on the affordability of electricity. And we looked at this graph and we recognised that if you draw a line from the current total cost of industry costs and wholesale over, then you could get to a position by 2030 where if the wholesale price was zero, bills would still be the same as where they are today because of the increase in non-commodity costs. So this is really very real and very plausible, and that quote made the headlines. Looking into a bit more detail about the individual costs, we can see this breakdown. Unfortunately, pretty much all of the costs, with the exception of the renewable obligation up there and the feed-in tariff, are increasing year on year to 2030. And I'm trying to draw attention particularly to the four costs that are particularly driven by the Clean Power 2030 agenda. The top one here is the nuclear regulated asset base, which is growing, and particularly the more development work that happens at Sizewell C, the higher the RAB cost will be. CFD is the poster girl, if you like, for Clean Power 2030 because it's the subsidy for the renewable wind and solar and biomass which is being built at the moment. That doesn't properly increase in size until 2029 when a lot more generation is going to come online. TNUoS is the comparable transmission network, the electricity motorway build program that we need in order to get all of the energy from those remote places to where consumers need to use it. And you'll notice particularly from April 26 that shoots up by a huge 80%. So any customer, whether they're domestic, small business, large business, I'm afraid they can expect to see their TNUoS costs go up by 80% from April of next year. The final one I want to talk about is balancing services use of system, and that is the reason why it's important to get a move on with the transmission network build up. And that's because if you build and you start getting a lot of generation from renewables in remote places and the transmission network isn't strong enough, then what the National Electricity System Operator, NESO, has to do is pay those renewables generation plants to turn off and then pay some gas-fired power station near to consumption to turn on. Last year that cost £1.5 billion. This year it's likely to be greater, and if we don't get the transmission network build out going early, then it could well be 12 or 13 billion pounds, adding another 20-25 pounds a megawatt hour to the cost. The base scenario we've got at the moment assumes that you get an early rollout of the transmission network, but if that falters relative to the renewable rollout, then the cost could really start to soar for the balancing service use of system. And as I was saying about the TNUoS going up by 80% this April coming, the blue bars show the cost in March next year and the purple the cost in April. So just in 1 month, just from one cost year to the next, we see the nuclear RAB go up a bit because Sizewell will be moving on with development more quickly, so it will be able to ask for more money. The renewable obligation and the feed-in tariff costs are largely driven by inflation, although you may have seen proposals to change the indexation for RO and FIT from RPI to a typically lower inflation measure called CPI, or Consumer price index, which would reduce those purple bars at least a little bit. And then we're coming towards the end of the current regulatory RIIO period for Duos, and with that there's a lot of extra incentives that that they can get. So those costs are somewhat higher than they were last year, but overall the biggest of the increases, I'm afraid, is coming from the transmission network. And that's just the changes which are coming for this April. I'm afraid we expect to see more changes coming in April 27, and this table shows some of the information that we're expecting. I'll just highlight a few of them. I won't go through all of them. Apologies for all the acronyms. BICS is the British Industrial Competitiveness Strategy, and the government is planning to give discounts or exemptions from the capacity market renewable obligation and feed-in tariff costs to BICS companies. They need a lot more detail on the scheme that we're expecting next quarter to get information about which industry is going to benefit from that, the scale of the scheme, exactly when it will start and exactly how it will work. We've had some broad government announcements, but nothing even close to a decision yet, so we're expecting a lot of information on that. The next one is the contracts for difference. We're expecting the results of AR7, that's the allocation round 7, that's the big auction that is going to give renewable subsidies to deliver a large amount of the extra renewables needed to achieve Clean Power 2030. And if that goes well from a Clean Power 2030 perspective, that is a lot of generation gets subsidies. That will give us more confidence that we're going to achieve that. On the other hand, if it's very poor, if very little volume is receives subsidies, then that would indicate that Clean Power 2030 is more at risk. We'll also look at, we're also expecting next year to start the process for the DUOS, the distribution usage system, the new regulatory or RIIO, RIIO 3, the new RIIO 3 business plans. And we're expecting, with the growth of flexibility, where more customers, consumers of all scales start wanting to export, as well as the growth of electric vehicle chargers, we're expecting DUOS to be high, continue to grow into the future. We're also expecting in Q1 a decision on the energy intensive industries network charge compensation scheme. That is an exemption currently of 60% to EIIs on their network bill, and there's a proposal to make that a 90% exemption, and we'll hear more about that in Q1. And finally, last but by no means least, I'm afraid, is the transmission network. So the transmission network, along with the gas, is it starts its new RIIO 3 period from April 26, so earlier than DUOS. We've had draft determinations and business plans taking place through this year, but in December we'll get the Ofgem final determination, and then in January NESO will publish what those rates are going to be. Shockingly, that's only going to be 2.5 months before the start of the new charging year, so customers and suppliers are going to get very little notice at all, which is a very poor state of affairs for a predictable, efficient energy market. Nevertheless, enough ranting about that. We've got a really interesting report, the Business Energy Tracker 2025, that we have just published. We've talked to a lot of customers and major energy users about how they perceive the cost of clean power. Will your business pay the price? And there's a great deal of concern. Almost everyone canvassed expressed concern about the rising costs to support low carbon transition, and I think you can probably tell from this video I share that concern. A significant minority, a third of businesses, don't think that they should be paying for the cost of clean power either, with 93% saying they're concerned about the future increases. It's a really good read. I've really enjoyed having a read through it myself, and if you're interested in looking at it, then you can just scan the QR code, which you can see on the bottom left of this slide, and that will take you straight to the report. Let's look now at the cost impact for you. So what does all of this mean for you? And to do that, we've actually built an energy cost calculator. The idea of it is to give you an indication of what sort of potential increase you might expect to face in your non-commodity costs over the next 5 years. This is the NBS energy cost calculator, where you can find out what Clean Power 2030 and the growth in industry costs means for your particular business. You have to start by entering a few details about your organisation. In this example, we're an East Midlands high voltage connected site with 1000 kVA and 1 gigawatt hour a year of consumption. You then have to enter a few details about yourself, which industry you're in, although that doesn't affect the results of this. And then you have to finally put in your work email address. I'm afraid it won't work if you put in a personal one. But once you've done all that, if you click on Get My Results, it will show you what it means for you. And it shows in this particular case that industry costs are projected to go up by 115% between 2025, when they like to be 141,000 a year, and 2030, when they're going to be 303,000. You can see it also shows the network policy and system percentage split each year. And you can also then fine tune it if you want to change your capacity or your connection, or even your grid connection voltage, and what that means for your industry costs. You will also get an email from NBS explaining that you've just completed this, and if you'd like to explore ways of reducing your industry costs further, then how you can go about doing that. I hope that's nice and clear and simple, a neat little tool to help you better understand your industry costs. So on to perhaps the most important slide of all. We know that rising costs are coming, and if you use the tool, you can have a good idea of what they might look like specifically for you. But what can you do? The most important, or I hope it doesn't sound glib, thing is to reduce your consumption, because every megawatt hour that you don't use, you're not paying renewable obligation, you're not paying FIT, you're not paying balancing services on. So reducing your consumption has always been on businesses' radars, but the rising cost of non-commodity and of commodity, to be frank, means that the prize for reducing consumption is much larger than it's ever been before. The second thing you can do is install on-site generation. So you've got pictured here some solar panels, but it could be solar or wind, or it could even be gas or diesel generators on site. The important thing is that it's behind the meter, because every megawatt hour that you generate and use is a megawatt that you're not paying renewable obligation, you're not paying FIT, you're not paying balancing services, you're not on. So you can reduce your costs a great deal by doing that. And if you reduce your consumption and you install on-site generation, you may be able then to reduce your network capacity. If you can reduce how much you're using at peak periods, then you can reduce your network capacity, which is what the vast majority of your transmission network costs and your distribution network costs are based on. And by doing that, you can get some very significant savings. And the last, and probably the one you've heard least about in the past, is load managing to reduce peak capacity market rates. You may not realise it, but on a pure unit rate of electricity basis, capacity market is actually far and away the most expensive of the non-commodity costs that your business has to pay. We were looking at one of the previous charts at how industry costs are about £130 a megawatt hour. Now they're going to move up towards £200 a megawatt hour. Capacity market is only charged Monday to Friday, 4 to 7 p.m. in the winter months of November to February, but it costs £150 a megawatt hour this current winter, next winter 26-27 it's going to be £200 a megawatt hour during those peak periods. So anything you can do to reduce your capacity, your consumption during those peak winter periods can massively reduce your electricity bills. So do please have a think about that. So wrapping all of this up, Clean Power 2030 is going to happen, and it's important for the country, but there will be a price to pay. Non-commodity costs, I'm afraid, will continue to rise substantially for the rest of this decade. I'm afraid as a result of all of that, the energy markets are becoming more volatile with less liquidity in the time horizon. But there are things you can do. You can think a bit about your, if you're able to, about your hedging or purchasing strategy for commodity. But perhaps the particular focus of this video is exploring flexibility, reduced demand consumption, on-site generation. You can get your non-commodity costs down dramatically. So I would encourage you to try to read the report, to try our new energy cost calculator, see what it means for you, and then have a chat with one of our colleagues here at npower Business Solutions to see how we can help you personally to reduce your energy costs. I hope you found that a helpful video. If you have any questions, please do get in touch.